Good morning, everyone, and welcome to webisode 7 of Tech Talk with Bill Baer. My name is Dan Holm, co-founder of IT Unity, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by Bill and Neil. So actually, why don't I toss it down to you guys or across to you guys to introduce yourselves really quickly. Bill?
Hey, good morning, everybody. Good morning, Dan. It's bright and early here in sunny Seattle, and we're fortunate enough today to have join us Neil Hodgkinson. So Dr. Hodgkinson, right above me here, has some exciting technical details regarding the cloud search service application, which we announced at Ignite in May. So we talked not only about how this would be a key cloud-accelerated experience that you'll find in 2016 that brings the capability of index unification, Office Graph, and delve to your content on premises. But as a result of that, we've had just a ton of questions regarding, from a functional perspective, how does it work? And from an architectural perspective, how does this particular service work, or how do we see it working in the next generation of SharePoint? So we brought Neil along with us today, and Neil is going to share some great information about it. We have some demonstrations as well as a presentation. So from there, I'll let Neil introduce himself, and we'll go from there.
Oops, sorry, wrong. Let me get a place where people can see you a little bit better, Neil, here. Oh, there we go. Excuse me for jumping around like that. I was trying to get a nice, smooth transition to your webcam, Neil. Now you're going to have to sort of start it again. I apologize. And Neil, it looks like you're on mute.
Oh, my audio is disconnected. Bear with me.
There we go.
Okay, cool. Sorry about that. Yeah, good morning. My name is Neil Hodgkinson. I'm a program manager in the Office 365 team. Bill said good morning from sunny Seattle. I'm sat not too far away from where Bill is in Seattle, in Redmond, and it isn't sunny here, Bill. It's grey skies. So as Bill said, the session today, we're going to cover off some of the architectural aspects of the Office 365 integration with SharePoint on premises for I guess you call it the new wave, or the new features we're introducing for hybrid, in this case specifically for search. So do we have the slide deck up, Lyman?
We do indeed. Yeah, switch us to that. And you're good to go.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about hybrid search.
Thanks, Dan. Okay, so as Bill introduced the session, hybrid search has been with us for quite a while now. We've had hybrid integration between SharePoint 2013, Office 365 since SharePoint 2013 was around. I guess it took a while for the capability to become pervasive amongst our customers, and indeed it took us quite a while for us to get some really truly prescriptive guidance. People were very dependent on Bill's blog and on some of our escalation services blog, but now I think we're really solidifying that message and really having a good story in terms of enabling people to do these kind of capabilities without too much trouble. So when we think about hybrid from a search perspective, what we're really thinking about is enabling our user base to find information regardless of where they actually exist within the organization. So if you imagine a scenario where we have office workers, desk workers, or traveling salesmen, perhaps traveling engineers, we don't want them to have to care about things like, hey, you know what, I need to VPN into on-premises to be able to get to this information. We want them to be able to find it simply and easily regardless of wherever they are. So by using the hybrid capabilities, it means that we can give people this single location where they can go and search for information. Now, as we think about the hybrid capabilities that we have today, with 2013, as I've already said, we introduced the hybrid capabilities in that version of the product. But it was, and I'm going to use the word limited. When I say limited, I don't really mean there was a problem with it, but it was a somewhat disjointed experience. We introduced the hybrid capability in terms of what we refer to as query federation, which essentially meant that along with your existing search results from your on-premises implementation, you were sending out additional queries to Office 365 as what we typically refer to as an outbound query, and retrieving a separate result set. A separate result set means, unfortunately, that you then end up in a scenario where you have discrete sets of results which have their own ranking, which the results that come back from those queries have different relevance compared to, or should I say, different relevance to each other. So it's, as I said, it's a somewhat limited, somewhat disjointed experience. There are people out there who try to overcome some of those limitations, but ultimately it doesn't overcome the limitation of having a single unified search index. It also meant that because we were still heavily dependent in on-premises search for your on-premises queries, then you had to host usually a significant number of machines, a significant number of SharePoint components on-premises to be able to perform those on-premises queries. So what I really want to do is, rather than get into the architecture first, let me show you the difference. Let me show you why the new version of search is better than what it was before. So I'm going to share my screen out, and hopefully you'll get to see a few things. So let me start by, I'm assuming you can see down here.
We sure can, Neil. It looks great.
Okay, cool. So let me start by really taking this one step further than just thinking about simple hybrid search or query federation or hybrid search scenarios. I'm going to show you the architecture of the demo in a few minutes. But what I want to point out significantly here is that these new features enable a whole new set of scenarios as well, not just the SharePoint vNext as in 2016 integration with Office 365, not just SharePoint 2013 integration with Office 365, but we've actually overcome some issues and now can offer integration with even down to SharePoint 2010. You know, we recognize that there's a significant user base out there still using SharePoint 2010, so let's show you how we can leverage the SharePoint 2010 experience or bring this hybrid experience into SharePoint 2010. And I'll show you the architecture of how we do this in a few minutes on a slide. But what I want to show you very simply is if I'm in the SharePoint 2010 Search Center, just like any other on-premises Search Center, and I issue a query for something like Sweden. So this is a query that should bring me back some results from a previous demonstration. If we had longer, I'd upload some new content for you and do a crawl. But what you can see here is two distinct documents. One is a slide deck, and that's on-premises. Okay, SharePoint 2010, shared documents. The other one is coming from Office 365. So we've enabled query integration at this point with SharePoint 2010, and the beauty of this solution is even in SharePoint 2010 we have a single set of results. And I'll show you some more a nicer demo in a moment. But that's the key significance, right? It's a single set of results that's being delivered from an Office 365 search index. So we have relevancy working correctly. If we would, and there is no refinements in this simple demo, but even if we had a number of refiners and filters in the search center, all of those capabilities would open up as well from that single set of results. The other thing, as well as integrating just simply with the search center, because of the way we build these hybrid scenarios, I can do similar kind of searches at site level. So all being well, I get site level results. Okay, so this is coming at the site level, and I can go one step further. If I go down into my list, we get the same experience here. If I was to do list level search, which my item doesn't seem to be enabled, so let me just have a quick check. Okay, so we can go down into this list. So it's list level as well. Now turning that around, this would work. I'm showing you with 2010 because that's new for hybrid. No one's been showing 2010 before. It works equally as well with 2013, equally as well with 2016. But let me turn the whole thing around and let's look at it from the Office 365 side. So in this case, I have a demo tenant here. Here's my hybrid demo hybrid.sharepoint.com. So I'm in Office 365 now, and I want to try and see, well, where are we getting results from? So if I do a similar search for the same keyword, and I'm deliberately trying to keep the result set small in this case, what we see is a scenario here where, okay, I have a result. This is the same one we saw in 2010, and it's located on my demo hybrid platforms. Okay, I've issued a query. I'm still in Office 365. We have what the concept of search verticals here. Search verticals allow us to filter. It's very similar. We can do similar things to how we used to do scopes in the past, or they're driven by query rules. If I click the everything vertical here, and these are configurable, you can build your own, even in Office 365 or on premises, then we should see that other result come back from SharePoint 2010. Now this is in Office 365 exposing search results for items that are located on premises. Okay, so the index that's being queried is the Office 365 search index, but the content that's coming back, or the results that are coming back, are entirely from on-premises in this case. And we can extend this. There's some, I won't want to spend too long in this. There's lots of other demos we could do. If I search for another term, we'll get a whole other bunch of results. Here we get a result block showing Word documents, but we even have scenarios here where we're querying and bringing file share content from on-premises, passed through our new search service application, and being exposed in the index in SharePoint Office 365. So that's kind of the whistle-stop tour of the beauty of this. Very flexible, lots of things we can do. So let's drop back to the slides.
I think as Neil switches back to the slides, one of the things that I've always tried to talk about when we talk about hybrid search is, A, you just saw something very compelling, particularly if you're still sitting on 2010 and you want to garner the capability of advanced hybrid search versus what we delivered in the past. And just briefly, the way I always describe it is if you think about the way we've really designed our hybrid experiences in our current version of SharePoint, it really was designed to try to mitigate that migration challenge, that concept of having content distributed across two discrete silos, and customers wanted a way to rationalize that information with a unified view. And V1 hybrid search was the answer to that problem, albeit limited to the extent that it was federated query. It was creating one query but retrieving two result sets that had no affinity to one another. And in this experience, when we unify the index, you get one result set back based on one query issued, which means it can be refined and manipulated as a unit as opposed to two discrete entities. So the new way to think about hybrid is it's not designed to mitigate migration challenges, and it's not designed to drive you to move data to the cloud in order to attain the benefits of the cloud. It's really designed to allow you to maintain that control of your content, but yet leverage the innovation of the cloud. So that's just kind of a simple way to think about the differentiation between hybrid V1 and hybrid V2. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Neil as we move back into considerations.
Thanks, Bill. I can see why you get the big events to talk at, and I get tech ready. Okay, cool. So we've seen the demo. This is a simplified architectural view, very simplified, of what we just saw effectively. And I'll go through the flow in a little bit more detail. What we had at the back end in terms of content sources for SharePoint search was SharePoint 2013, SharePoint 2010, and we had the file share, as you saw the file share result. We also had SharePoint 2016. And in this particular demo, we were using SharePoint 2016 as the search service application where we've configured the hybrid connection to Office 365. And it was also acting in order to enable the SharePoint 2010 experience. It was acting as a published service application for SharePoint 2010 as well. And that's how we enabled that capability for 2010. Published service applications is something we've had around for a very long time. And the dash line you can see in the view is, as well as this cloud search service application, or to give it its real name, hybrid cloud search service application, being available in SharePoint 2016 when we ship that version of the product, we are backporting that feature to SharePoint 2013 as well, and that will be available later this year in a public update for the platform. And we'll bring out a whole ton of guidance and deployment capabilities. What you do see on this slide, though, as well, is kind of a simplified view of Microsoft Azure. And I'll talk a little bit more of that in a few minutes as we move on to another slide. And then obviously at the far right there with Office 365. The little people icons there are really there just to show you that each of those 4 people, if you like, will have exactly the same search experience from all 4 of those locations with every single keyword they query for. So that's kind of to move on to Bill's point about this kind of being generation 2 of our hybrid experience. It's enabling that same capability. So there's the disjointed experience I mentioned before has gone away or will go away with this feature, and it enables a completely identical experience regardless of where you are. So moving on to well, we've already talked about this really in terms of the search capabilities, searching from on-premises. Another scenario that this opens up is the ability to feed content or to expand your experiences within Delve. So if you think about what Delve does, it's built off the Office Graph, it's built off search experiences within Office 365, probably a topic for a whole new session. But because it's driven by search experiences as well, it means that you can now begin to enrich your Delve experience in Office 365 with these same search experiences. So if we were searching for a document, for example, and those documents exist in Office 365 because we've crawled them and they've been pushed up to Office 365, they start to become active in the Delve experience, in the Office Graph integration. So over time, you'll start to see these very rich experiences. Again, demo-wise, don't have a great deal of time to do that demo today, session for another time, but it's a really fabulous experience now. And we're starting to see, when customers start to see on-premises experiences pop up in Delve, it just blows people away. And it blew me away the first time I saw it. So congratulations there for the Oslo team. Thanks, Dan. So let me give you a little bit more detail on specifically how this capability works. So any of you that are already Office 365 customers will be, hopefully, or should be familiar with the left-hand side of this chart, which is the whole Active Directory on-premises directory synchronization process to Windows Azure AD. And that's a capability that if you're using Office 365 and you're not only using cloud accounts, then you'll all be doing this either maybe perhaps integrated with ADFS for single sign-in experiences, or perhaps just using password synchronization for same sign-in. The core components, though, that we're interested in terms of how this platform works is essentially the pieces in the middle. So if I start with number 1 and 2 down here, this is our cloud search service application. And in terms of look and feel, it looks no different to a regular search service application. It's just been configured with a number of parameters that enable it to communicate to that Azure endpoint that we have hosted in a series of a set of infrastructure in Azure. The communication is the padlock there indicates really that kind of gives this away. The communication is entirely encrypted. So the cloud search service application is configured with content sources in just the same way that you configure content sources today. When we start to crawl those content sources, however, instead of passing the content as it's crawled over to the content processor that you would normally be running on premises, instead we make this outbound connection to Azure. At which point, when the pre-parsed items reach the Azure endpoint, they're queued as you'd expect. We need to build some tolerance in here. We can't have the environment being completely flooded, so we need to build some queuing mechanism in here. And we effectively build a pipeline that exists in Azure instead of on-premises. So the pipeline consists of the content processing, the usual things you'd expect to see with things like entity extraction, word breaking, stemming, all the kind of processes that we do in a regular content processing pipeline. The sixth item on here that you see is the concept of what we call ACL mapping. So if you imagine that the content that's coming from on-premises will be secured with Windows ACLs, and then we have to make sure that those same ACLs, or the representation of those same ACLs, exists in Windows Azure AD. And that is fundamental to the whole process, because we have to make sure that we can match the ACLs on the item with existing ACLs in Office in the Windows Azure AD to support the whole query and security trimming capabilities that we require, of course, to make sure that we're delivering a secure platform. And then the final step is probably the most simplest one, and that's where we hand over or effectively write those newly parsed artifacts, the metadata, the keywords, the ACLs, into the SharePoint Online Search Index, at which point you then get the experiences you've just seen today with those search queries. So it's a very, very interesting environment. I really enjoyed working with the search team on this, and I think it gives us significant power. And of course, because this endpoint's based in Azure, in terms of scalability, the capabilities are phenomenal there. So the final thing, I guess, before we start to open up for questions is we're already running very heavily with this platform today in MSIT. We have this capability running. We've been doing this for a number of months now. We have a significantly active TAP program. Several vendors, several ISVs, several of our partners are already doing this capability, and we have a very broad TAP program with the general SharePoint 16 people who are also asking about this capability, and they want to bring that into the regular platform TAP as well. As I already said, we'll ship this capability for SharePoint 2013 later this year. I'm not sure what the exact release time is, but it'll be certainly before the close of the calendar year. And then it will ship natively in SharePoint 2016. So it's a significant investment in search capabilities for SharePoint 2016. And the link at the bottom there is just to show you the much broader session where colleagues of ours, Katrina Hammervold and Manas Biswas, went through a whole end-to-end demo of showing how the crawling works and the full process. You can see that from Ignite. And I think Dan's added it to the links as well. So with that, I think we're done. I think we open up for questions.
Yeah, and that's actually great, Neil. I think one of the keys that we really didn't get to expand upon at Ignite was just the core infrastructure aspect of what this is, and particularly around the Azure component itself. So that's kind of the key piece to think about. And the way I try to articulate it is, you can think of it as a hybrid search experience. That's one way to think about it. You can think about it as a way to attain the benefits of Delve and the Office Graph. That's the second way to think about it. And then the third way to think about it is, if you think about it, Office 365 and Azure are going to do all the heavy lifting now from a search perspective for you. So there's almost a way that you can look at this as leveraging it as search as a service, in really reducing your existing search infrastructure and let us bear the burden of the heavy lifting of managing the index. And then you simply just retrieve results from said index. So there's a number of different ways that you can instrument our new hybrid technologies. It's not just the rudimentary, I want to search across two places. It could be, not only do I want to do that, but I also want the power of machine learning, but I want to reduce my infrastructure. I want to reduce my data center footprint. I want to kind of, condense what my SharePoint architecture looks like and just subscribe to search as a service in Office 365. So that's another great way to think about it.
I apologize for the phone ringing in the back. I'm not going to jump up to grab it, but we've got a couple of great questions in that I'd like to repeat and get as part of an answer that we can have in a recording from you guys. So let's start with some questions about the basic architectural requirements of this at the minimum level, which is, if someone has SharePoint 2010 currently on-prem, what do they need to take advantage of hybrid search moving forward? What's the minimum that they would need from a version and a server perspective?
So the minimum they would need to do any of our hybrid capabilities would be to deploy SharePoint 2013 as a bare minimum, the minimum supported version of SharePoint 2013. If they wanted to do kind of regular hybrid experiences, the inbound, outbound scenarios that we talk about frequently, if they want to do this key specific scenario with the concept of the cloud search service application, still SharePoint 2013. And I think Bill answered this in the chat window. The key thing is that they don't need to deploy a large search infrastructure of SharePoint 2013. A single box will be enough to satisfy the requirements, as long as it meets the demands of the user, the customer, in terms of the query throughput, the crawl throughput, etc. But one box is the minimum you need.
That's fantastic news.
VM, right? Simple VM.
Exactly, and so they don't need to have any of their user-facing content in 2013. 2013 is just hosting the hybrid search service application code.
That's right. It's effectively a proxy. I think Bill determined it as a proxy for the connection in the chat.
Fantastic. And there was another question in the text chat that came up that I'd love to get captured as well, which is, What is the story for access to these unified search experiences and capabilities for developers?
So you would have the same, if you think about Office 365, the access that developers have today in terms of leveraging the search index, making for the query side of things, they would effectively get the same experience. In terms of would they have the capability to maybe to communicate directly with the API that's hosted in Azure or influence what's going in there, today there's no capability to do that. Whether that becomes a future state is another question for another day. But certainly in terms of experiences and building search-driven experiences, it's the same index as they have today, so the experience is the same.
Fantastic. Mario has a question, a great one in chat, which is, do on-prem only content requests still use the on-prem index and search, or now with this new hybrid search architecture, do all requests get filled from one service in the cloud?
So there's kind of two answers to that question. It's a depends question, actually. If you're using a single search center and you're crawling all of your content with the new cloud search service application and the crawler infrastructure there, then everything is in Office 365. Everything is in the SPO search index. However, if you think a little bit further down the line, there will be customers and people who don't want to crawl everything. There may be selected secure content, compliancy reasons why they don't necessarily want all the content crawled and indexed in Office 365. So at that point, you can still go down the scenario of having an on-premises search index for those items. You would need a separate search service application, though. So you would need to do some query federation between those search service applications. So the default action, crawl everything with this new search service application, and everything goes to the cloud.
Yeah, and
Wonderful.
I think I was going to say one of the answers that Neil just gave is actually a really good one, because probably the predominant question coming out of Ignite was, what if I am governed by corporate and regulatory compliance that precludes me from even having my index in the cloud? But I definitely want to leverage the capability. There is some content that is supported in the cloud in my industry, and there's some content that's not. Is there selectivity in what becomes a component of the cloud index versus my online index or on-prem index? And Neil just answered that question, is yes, that capability exists. It's not an all or none proposition. And then the other thing to think about too is your index in the cloud in SPO is content that is governed by all of the policies that we have. There isn't an exception to that content. So everything that you can read about in the Office 365 Trust Center is applicable to your indexed content as well. Just because it's not a blob doesn't mean that it's not content through the lens of our service, which means all of the great new announcements, some in the past, such as Fort Knox, or even some of the ones that we've made recently surrounding customer lockbox. All of those concepts and constructs about the way we do privacy and security are applicable to your index as well. So it's not only blob content only, right? Those policies are not only, they're not limited to unstructured content. They extend to structured content, such as an index as well.
That's great news. And there's some other questions in chat that I'll come back to, but I want to follow up on that point, Bill, because I know there's a lot of customers who have perceptions of what their compliance regulations are for their industry, for their geography. And those perceptions I've seen quite often get overblown, where it becomes a situation where they say, I can't do anything in the cloud. I can't put any data in the cloud for what fill in the blank reason. Geography related, information class related. And I have seen customers, very big ones, global customers that have very significant compliance and security concerns, looking at the hybrid search capabilities and being very thoughtful about what they put in the hybrid search and what they don't. So they're finding ways to leverage these capabilities in the right places in their business. It's not an all or nothing thing. Can you talk a little bit more about that kind of experience that you've had with customers?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is when when you think about corporate and regulatory compliance, it's generally difficult within an organization to find one individual that actually understands those requirements to the extent to where they can definitively respond to those requirements. In many cases, a requirement which exists may actually be thousands of pages of documentation, and it's a matter of trying to understand what those are. But I think the key thing is typically, there's the context of what a particular regulation requires that's in the document itself, but then there's the actual regulation itself, and that's kind of what you should be focused on. So if it's HIPAA, the easiest way to figure out whether or not you would be compliant from a HIPAA perspective is visit the Office 365 Trust Center. Look at the compliance that we support, and you'll find HIPAA in the list, and it just kind of simplifies it. I think most people tend to dive too deeply into the context of something like HIPAA as opposed to just focusing on it, at the macro level and looking at it that way. But there are obviously industries who do have data sensitivity concerns, and they may be real or they may be perceived. So hybrid is a good way of meeting customers in the middle, letting them take advantage of the innovation while at the same time giving them the control that they desire. Looks like Neil is cranking away at some of these questions, which is great. You may be on mute, Dan.
Thanks, Bill, for that awesome answer. And let's capture some of these great questions on the recording and see if you have any other points for them. Neil, does all of the existing content sources like file shares, Exchange public folders, will all of those be supported in this new hybrid search capability?
Yes, so today with the new capability, anything that's a default content source in SharePoint 2013, 2016, we will support with this new capability as well.
Awesome. And you mentioned that one of the benefits of having this architecture is that now the power of the Office Graph and experiences coming from the Office Graph, like Delve, suddenly become enabled for on-prem content. So for me to give users the access to Delve and have on-prem content visible within Delve, is this hybrid search a prerequisite for that?
So today it will be right now. And it's important to differentiate here between how the Office Graph is populated today and what may happen in the future, which is kind of out with this scope of this call. This is a search-driven experience. We're not collecting anything other than search experiences. So when you query for content, these queries will start to influence the Office Graph. We are not collecting signals. So if you have people, for example, opening Office documents on premises, whereas in Office 365, those would collect, the Office Graph would then be populated with those signals, or we would process those signals into the Office Graph. We're not at that stage with this capability, so it's purely a search experience right now. But yes, you will need this capability to be able to experience those new items appearing in Delve.
And how does the hybrid search experience influence people search?
So, if you think about the way we crawl content, really the experience doesn't change a great deal. This is really a content acquisition thing. So if it's a content source and we're crawling it, you're going to get it. It will appear. Obviously, we can crawl people profiles as we do today with SharePoint Search, the My Site capabilities, or the profile crawl. So some of those things will start to appear as well. But you're not going to get. I don't. To be honest, I think we still have a lot to learn about the full power of this thing. So I would hesitate to say you won't see any differences, or you're going to see phenomenal differences. I think unless Bill knows and has experienced this, I personally haven't looked in any depth at the people experience here.
No, and myself neither. I've been focusing more on looking at the core content experience itself absent people, so that's one of them. But I haven't dove into the people experience itself, and it would be something interesting as well, and perhaps we can just kind of tee up some work around it, and then come back in a couple of weeks and provide something positive, either through a great answer or a great demonstration. But either one, I think it's worth something looking at.
Yeah, that's actually a great idea for a future Tech Talk, is the entire new people experience, because it's changing in Office 365, it's changing in SharePoint 2016, and obviously this hybrid piece would be very interesting to explore. Another question Ryan asks, how does the crawler manage SharePoint online indexing of file permissions and on-prem how does it manage permissions on-prem and in the cloud, specifically with file permissions, without having Azure accounts and Active Directory sync? Or is that really, you can't do this without the sync in place?
Yeah, so Active Directory sync is a prerequisite for all of our hybrid scenarios. We need a mechanism to capture information about your on-premises user that we can then match with the claims of any kind of incoming queries, or any claims that I use to secure any object. If we can't make those matches, it's very simplistic, but if we can't make those matches, there's no way we can guarantee security trimming. So at that point, we'll abandon the query at that point. So you need that as a prereq.
Yeah, I think it kind of comes down to ACL mapping and trying to establish a relationship between two entities, and those two entities have to have a relationship to one another. And Azure AD Sync is kind of step one. You can obviously graduate to ADFS from there, and so you kind of start with same sign-on, and you can move up to single sign-on as a step-up pattern. But the key thing I tell people with Azure AD Sync is there is largely little to no complexity to actually standing up Azure AD Sync. It's operationally, now obviously in an organization there's a lot that goes into these things, testing and validation, but from a pure deployment perspective, it isn't a day-long endeavor. It's not a half-day-long endeavor. It's actually procedurally it's very quick to set it up. It's not complex to the extent of something like ADFS. So it's a good way to start, and then leverage that step-up methodology to move to true single sign-on from same sign-on.
Yeah, and Ryan Yates in the chat is validating that, saying in his experience it's 10 to 25 minutes to set up, which is awesome. Ryan also had a question, will the cloud search give us the ability to set content sources that allow us to exclude areas? For example, one content source for what we want to have searched, like on-prem search.
Yes, absolutely. So if you're familiar with administering search on premises today from 2010 or 2013, that same set of rules that you have, or capabilities that you have in the crawl rules engine to exclude paths, or to exclude folders in file shares, to exclude whole directories under websites, that same capability exists today. And even to the extent of if you want to use a different crawl account for a custom repository, that all works as well.
Fantastic. And what about Yammer content? How does this play into the hybrid search story?
I don't think we have a story for that right now. Sorry, Dan.
Okay, that's fair. That's all right. Just making sure we answer the
Yammer,
questions, and even if the answer is no.
It's a very good question.
Yeah, so from a Yammer perspective, it's
what was that, Bill?
And I was going to say today, even from a I was saying even from a search perspective today, Yammer is kind of a it's excluded from your core SharePoint search experience today, and its discovery of conversations is facilitated through Yammer. So we don't have anything today that enables you to really index Yammer content. Now there are examples. Steve Peshka has a great example leveraging cores that you can use to actually pull Yammer content into a search experience, but that's still absent actually indexing that content. So the capability, just doesn't exist today to actually index and expose that content via a native search experience in SharePoint.
To that question, this is a little bit off topic, but I think you probably have an answer to this one. One of the other options for conversing in an organization is the new conversations capability within groups. which is obviously powered by Exchange. It sort of sits in that bucket. Is that something that's indexed right now? I actually haven't had time to even ask that question.
I think we're waiting for each other to answer, Bill. I'd have to follow up on that one, Dan. I would be very surprised if we excluded groups, but I'd need to follow up with the search guys to see what mechanism we do today to index that content, if at all.
Cool, that'd be interesting. Another scenario that I'd like to ask about are organizations that have more than one, or let's say more than two instances of SharePoint. So not just on-prem and Office 365, but maybe they have several on-prem farms. Maybe they're geographically distributed and they have a European data center, an American data center, and an Office 365 tenancy. Maybe they even have multiple tenancies because they're a single company with multiple, subsidiaries. What capabilities does this new hybrid search give to those kinds of very distributed scenarios?
I think if we look at the on-premises scenario to begin with, this new capability. I mean, the old scenario was each of those. If all of those on-premises farms were leveraging a single search service application, for example, then they could do outbound query federation easily. If they are looking at using this new capability, then we're introducing something now which was really kind of a byproduct of doing this, and that's the capability to have distributed crawl. So we can host one of these search service applications in each of these remote locations. They can all communicate to the same API in Azure and all feed the same Office 365 search index. So it's a nicer experience than we've had in the past for sure. The question of how does that affect me if I have multiple tenants is probably one. I mean, I know there is lots of talk about tenant-to-tenant interaction and in loose terms creating some kind of trusting mechanism between tenancies. I don't think today we have a really true definition of what, if anything, that will look like in the future. I don't know whether Bill can expand on that, but certainly I wouldn't like to speculate anything at this point, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, to add to what Neil said is one of the key advantages, particularly that addresses that question, is one with hybrid search, you can make it a many-to-one relationship, meaning many on-prem instances that have a relationship to a single index in Office 365. But one of the things we're looking at, and that's why I couldn't expand on it, Neil can't expand on it, but we did talk a little bit about it at Ignite, is we're thinking about hybrid more broadly than what we used to. And what we used to think is hybrid was representative of a tenant and a on-premises farm. It was a one-to-one relationship, very binary relationship between those two entities. As we look at hybrid moving forward, we're looking at it in a number of different ways. We're looking at it as a one-to-many relationship, which Neil just talked about with on-premises installations and a singular tenant. We're looking at it as a one-to-many relationship, a many-to-one relationship, in that one of the things we are looking at is does the hybrid story expand beyond just that on-prem relationship to online, but can it also be an online-to-online relationship? And it's one of the things we're looking at. We just, we don't have a great answer in terms of what it would look like potentially, how we would facilitate it. It's just one of the things we're looking at. Now at Ignite, we did discuss one of the things we are doing in that space, which is B2B external sharing. So the concepts of external sharing between related tenancies, so business-to-business external sharing. And we have a session that you can find if you search for B2B external sharing on Channel 9 in our Ignite channel. The very back half of that session actually covers that particular construct.
And, well, that's a really exciting opportunity for the future, but I'm sure most people here would agree. Just the ability to have several on-prem instances unified through hybrid search is an enormous value add. So congratulations, guys, on getting that to the point where it's being talked about and being demoed. It's really fantastic. And we've actually run quite long for this 30-minute Tech Talk. I know both Bill and Neil are in Redmond and have lots to do. So I would like to say thank you guys so much for an incredibly valuable Tech Talk. Clearly from the chat, the questions, all of which you guys answered beautifully, this is a hot topic and something that people are really excited about what you've created and are pushing out to the market over the next year. Congratulations and thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad Glad everybody could join us today. Mahalo, Dan, for facilitating the conversation every other Friday. So, today's was great. It was great that we could actually bring in Neil to really, kind of go deep on the technical aspects of what we're thinking about, from a hybrid search perspective, and really bring some guidance into the conversation as well. So, it's always helpful not to just see how the technology works, but really what enables the technology.
Exactly. And Bill mentioned every other Friday. 2 Fridays from now is actually Independence Day here in the U.S., so we're going to be taking a break on the 4th, but we will be returning on the 10th of July for the next Tech Talk with Bill Baer. Hopefully we'll have many more opportunities to get Neil and other friends of Bill's onto the show. So we'll look forward to seeing you guys on the 10th. We have the registration link that will come up in just a moment here, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. Until then, have a great remainder of the winter, since we'll be jumping into summer next week, and we'll see you after July 4th. Have a great one, everybody.
Thanks all.
Thanks. See you.